I'm not so convinced that we all know what we're talking about when we talk about luck.
The dictionary says luck, success or failure apparently brought by chance rather than through one's own actions.
But if you ask anyone about luck, they'll usually say something like, you make your own luck, or luck comes from hard work.
I mean, look at all these quotes. Chance favours the prepared mind. Diligence is the mother of good luck. The winds and waves are always on the side of the ablest navigators. They all say the same thing. Set the conditions right, put in the effort, and the luck will come your way. But what if it doesn't? What if you work your butt off, you try everything you can think of, you spend years honing your craft, but still no luck? That's pretty much what happened to this guy. That's me 25 years ago.
I mean, look at him. Have you ever seen a more unlucky looking dude than that?
So today I want to tell you the story of how my luck changed. It's a story about how, after a decade of trying, my career as a composer was really going nowhere fast. I was feeling pretty uncertain about my direction, and with nothing much happening on the composing front,
I made a rather half-hearted attempt to set up a web design company. It was a pretty spectacular failure, but it led to a chain of events without which I don't think I'd have the composing career that I have today. It was the moment that my luck changed, but I realised today that luck has very little to do with it. It was actually something else, something much more important.
luck is something us artists tread carefully around, as if we know how important it is to our success. No one wishes each other good luck in the performing world, it's too dangerous. In the dance world, you say meh. I guess I better beep that because it's the French for sh**. In opera, you say the phrase toi toi toi, which probably originates in the tradition of spitting 3 times to warn off evil spirits.
I spit too.
And of course, for an actor, you wish them to break a leg.
Break a leg.
Break a leg!
Better to tell somebody to break a leg than wish them good luck. That shows you just how important luck feels to artists. So important that they daren't even mention it for fear of jinxing it. Now, speaking for myself, there's one specific way that I've always considered myself to be lucky, and that is that I've always known what I wanted to do from a young age. Eat ice cream. Okay, and also be a musician. Music was an obsession of mine. It was something that I felt that belonged to me for as long as I can remember. There was never really any question music was going to be my life in one way or another. And I've thought about people I've met who don't have that, who, through no fault of their own, don't know what to do with their lives. Having this kind of sense of a calling, well, that really is a great piece of luck to start out with. Here's 15-year-old me saving the day for my local drama group by stepping in as their pianist at the last minute, making the headlines in the local paper. 15-year-old me had a dream. He barely knew any classical music, but he'd started to compose, and he had the dream of one day having his music performed here at the Royal Albert Hall at the biggest festival of classical music, the Proms. And, well, he'd probably not even heard an opera by then, or if he had, he probably had that kind of warbling stereotype that some of you might have of it. But he dreamed of something to do with music and stage that he couldn't yet put his finger on.
15-year-old me had a strange mixture of determination and imposter syndrome. He was determined to achieve those goals, but at the same time they seemed so far out of reach as to seem completely ridiculous.
So if you told 15-year-old me that he would indeed fulfill that dream, that he would come here to the Albert Hall to hear his own music being performed, if you told him that he would fulfill even that not yet dream and write operas that would be commissioned by the Royal Opera House and Glyndebourne and get nominated for prestigious prizes like the Olivier Awards, it's safe to say 15-year-old me would find that pretty hard to believe.
But one day those dreams did come true. He had a piece of music performed at the Proms, and he's written operas which have been performed here at the Royal Opera House. In fact, it was that opera that made him first start thinking about luck.
So Philip Pullman is best known for his Dark Materials trilogy. This is the latest book, The Book of Dust. But before that, he wrote a shorter story called The Firework Maker's Daughter. In it, a young girl wants to be a firework maker like her father, and she learns that to become one, you need 3 gifts, which it turns out she's had all along. Those gifts are talent, determination, and luck. And I made that story into an opera which premiered at the Royal Opera House in 2013.
And that lesson of the 3 gifts has stayed with me because it's just so accurate. Whenever you see someone who has done well, they have obviously some kind of talent, but they've often worked really hard for years and years. They've got the determination, but then there'll always be some kind of luck involved to make that final leap.
Now, I'll leave others to judge whether I have talent or not, but I've certainly been determined and driven towards my goals. As I mentioned, I did feel lucky to know what I wanted and the direction I wanted to take my life. But to explain the true role that luck, or what I thought was luck, played in my career, we need to go back to the period around the turn of the millennium.
So it's the year 2000, I'm 30 years old, imagine already 30.
30-year-old me has had just a handful of professional performances and a couple of competition wins.
He'd set up an ensemble with his friend and given it the absolutely terrible title of Ophelia. You know, the one in Hamlet who drowns while singing. Turned out to be the perfect metaphor for the ensemble. They did one performance here at St Martin in the Fields on a similarly gloomy day. Crashed the van that was taking the percussion to the performance and called it a day.
30-year-old me has written a couple of 10-minute operas, and wow, the suspicion he'd had about music and theatre had been confirmed. He'd loved working on those. That was an area he felt like he excelled in, and he really hoped he'd get to do more, maybe even imagine a full-length opera someday. Super exciting, but still totally impossible idea. After more than a decade, 30-year-old me has finally left the warm blanket of academia. Throughout his 20s, he'd stayed in school because he knew that outside the world was a lot colder and less protected. The chances of getting performances in particular were really slim. So he'd done an undergraduate degree in music,
2 master's degrees in composing at the Royal College of Music, and then he'd strung out a doctorate here at King's College over 5 years. But that was all finished now and he was out in the real world.
One more piece of luck he'd had was to meet his wife during that second master's degree. Lucky not just because one of the most beautiful girls he'd ever seen returned his glances, but also because she saw something in him beyond the scruffy exterior and the guy barely scraping a living. For some people, meeting a partner is something that has no particular effect on their career or work. But for me, it felt like the 2 of us had planted our flag in the ground and established home base, and I could finally knuckle down and learn and study with an intensity I'd never had before. So that for 30-year-old me,
By the time he'd finished his studies, he did finally feel like he knew a little more than nothing. But by the end of those studies, 30-year-old me was in danger of hitting a brick wall. He was scraping a living teaching piano and accompanying on the piano at a kids' ballet school.
newly married and contemplating starting a family, in terms of his career, he was a little bit lost. The chances of earning a living as a classical concert hall composer are almost zero. Even very successful composers have to rely on other sources, usually teaching or performing. And 30-year-old me was a very long way from being any kind of successful. What's more, he'd always assumed he would take the most traditional route for composers to earn money and become a composition prof at a university. But having done a few stints as a teaching assistant at King's, 30-year-old me realised that wasn't going to be a life for him. Giving lectures gave him cold sweats weeks in advance, and the environment just made him feel uncreative and caged. I can see now that it was a time in my life that for many aspiring artists becomes a turning point. Many of my composing friends went through the same crisis at similar times in their own lives, and quite a few didn't get out the other side. They ended up giving up composing altogether. But just 5 years later, here I am taking my bow on the Carnegie Hall stage in New York. So what had happened? What kind of magic did 30-year-old me use to get himself out of that hole? Well, he did probably the last thing you would expect. He went back to something he'd done as a kid, computer programming. The internet was really starting to take off, and he figured he could set up a company making websites for customers. That would be something he could do from home and fit it in while he carried on trying to compose. But at this stage he was probably beginning to doubt whether the composing would ever lead anywhere. 2, maybe even 3 years went by where he barely composed anything. Without any realistic possibility of a performance, it just seemed a bit hopeless, a bit pointless. He was no longer feeling particularly lucky. The lowest point came after he'd paid a lot of money that he didn't have on a bunch of adverts for the new business, and not a single person responded. Not only was his composing career failing, it seemed he wasn't much good at business either. Then finally, one day, the phone does ring, and it's a guy named Richard. Richard doesn't have a business, he's just a guy with an idea. It's this very strange metaphysical, philosophical theory about the universe and our place in it. All very interesting, but definitely not the start to a website business I've been expecting. So 30-year-old me meets up with 60-year-old Richard, and despite the age difference, we really hit it off. He's an artistic soul who's thrilled to learn about my composing side, and whilst we continue to work on my website, one day he asks me to come with him to watch a play by his writer friend called Anna. So I meet up with him and Anna, the show is great, and before long the three of us are firm friends. And although my web design business doesn't take off, I start making other sites of my own that eventually allow me to earn my living. One of them is a site for writers called WriteWords, which the three of us found and run together. One day Anna rings up and says she's seen an opportunity for composers and librettists to develop an opera together, so should we apply? Sure, I say, why not? So we put our proposal together, the months go by, and we make it through the selection process. The opera starts to get developed, and eventually, with the help from the company that had put on my previous mini-operas, we found that we'd written Push, my first full-length opera, which was staged in London and toured the UK. And it went down really well. After that was all over and behind us, I submitted the score of Push to a call for composers for a Carnegie Hall workshop and residency, and to my absolute amazement that gets accepted.
Okay, so here I am in New York, in the city. This is Times Square.
So 36-year-old me finds himself on his way to New York to hear his music being performed. His luck is beginning to change. So that opera Push really was the start of it all. Since then, I've never not had a new commission to work on. This was me just a few weeks ago at the Royal Festival Hall, taking another awkward bow after a new piece I'd written for the LPO. In The Firework Maker's Daughter, Leela learns that the third gift she needs to become an artist is luck. In her case, her luck was to have good friends who cared enough about her to follow her up on the dangerous trip up Mount Merapi and rescue her just in the nick of time. And the more I've reflected on the opera over the years, the more I felt that really misstates the case. There was no luck involved, it was the power of friendship that saved her. I'd long thought about how my friendship with Anna was my real luck, because without her suggestion to apply for the opera workshop, it's quite possible my whole career as a composer would never have taken off. But I realise now it goes back a stage further than that. If I'd never tried to start that web design company and never placed that one terribly performing advert, I would never have met the one person who did respond to it. That one person, Richard, who passed away a couple of years ago, happened to become my friend, and like any good friend, he was looking out for me, thinking of ways he could help and support me and make my life better. Only through him did I meet Anna and eventually get that chance to reignite my composing career. Friends are like the roots that you lay down around you. They give you stability, they feed you, they nurture you. Sometimes they hold you firm when you're about to fall. A true friend will help you stand tall and become the beautiful thing you dream of being. And although in some respects my story is about luck, I mean, Carnegie Hall had one of those horrible age limits on their opportunity, and I was very lucky to scrape into their 35 and under limit with literally 2 weeks to spare. But for me, it's about learning two important lessons. The first is the lesson that I still have to keep relearning. I suppose I'm particularly addressing this video to people like me who, on the whole find interaction pretty exhausting. There's a reason I enjoy sitting in my room working on my compositions and videos by myself, because I know in that situation my brain's at peace. When I'm out, I do like meeting people, I do enjoy people's company, but then it often takes me hours to recover. That's one of the reasons I don't really teach face-to-face, because a meeting like that often ruins the day for me. I'm just exhausted from it. So quite often that puts me off from going out and meeting people. I'm always not sure, is it going to be worth the energy it's going to cost me? But this video is really just as a reminder to myself that some of the best things in life come when you put yourself outside of your comfort zone. That's an important lesson to learn. And the second is that some of those best things in life are friends. And to treasure the friends I do have and try to be as supportive and nurturing to them as they are to me. And although this story isn't about her and she's kept herself well hidden from this channel so far, which is probably wise, for me there's one friend in particular who's been by my side for 30 years now. She's been a source of good luck and good haircuts for all this time. And as another YouTuber once put it, gosh, you've been like a tsunami of good fortune in my life. So this is just a little thank you to you for being there. And all I can say is I wish all of you watching the good luck to find a friend as good as that.